Yeah, it's live.
Okay. Hey friends, this is Les Mood with the Energy Independent Show, here to host the Clean Energy Revolution Smart Grid panel. Today we have three leaders in the industry with regard to efficiency, software, and the future of mobility. So today we have Sholi Goodman from LF Energy Foundation, we have Vic Birkenau from Coben Systems, and we have Sheba Bomik from SignWatts. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, Sholi, and the LF Energy Foundation?
Hi, my name is Shuli Goodman. I'm the executive director of LF Energy. LF Energy stands for Linux Foundation Energy. We are an umbrella project that is within the Linux Foundation, which is the home of the Linux kernel and about 400 other projects. That software is probably the world's most important software. The world runs on it, whether it's telecommunications or finance or healthcare or cloud or the internet, core infrastructure, all of that. LF Energy, our mission really is to build the non-differentiating code that is going to enable the grid of the future. And so I'll leave it at that, and we can talk more about it later.
Awesome. So, Vic, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work at Coben Systems?
Yes, thank you, Les. Pleasure to be on with everybody, and looking forward to it. My name is Vic Birkenau. I'm president and CEO of Coben Systems, a company that specializes in the last mile of the smart grid with our Genius technology. We have developed the world's basically first solid state breaker panel intended to replace the century-old mechanical panel that's in existence today. And the purpose of this panel is to bring together all the stakeholders within the entire smart grid value chain and change the way electricity is delivered and consumed within the premises. And we've been operating now, for about going on 11 years. We've had this technology for a good 15 years with a great deal of development, and it's truly a world-class technology.
Awesome. Thank you, Vic. Now, Sheba, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and SignWatts?
Thank you, Les. Thank you for having me on this panel. Again, I'm obviously honored to be here with all the stalwarts here. We are originally a DOE-funded operation. We had a completely disruptive manner of power conversion. And as you pointed out earlier, that what we do is we take solar energy, battery energy, and any kind of energy that is segmented, and we are able to craft it and manage it into the grid in a completely disruptive manner, both in terms of power density, cost, efficiency, all of those attributes. Now, we are targeting the electric vehicle market, although we got our roots in photovoltaic. And my particular background with respect to that is power conversion for many years. And now I have been running SignWatts for also quite a few years now. So looking forward to the next steps.
Awesome. Well, in my view, the reason the three of you are here is that smart grids are going to require some smarter approaches. And from the 6 months or so that I've done Hot Energy News and the Energy Independent Show, I found in talking to all of you actually and others that there's really, in my view, three takeaways. One, we need power electronics that are more efficient. Two, we need more energy management of production loads, as well as the generation and management load controls. And then we need some interoperability between all of these technologies and security as well. And that's where I see the three of you playing a role is in efficiency, management, and interoperability. So Sholi, can you explain what you saw as an opportunity for and why LF Energy is really doing what it's doing in general for the interoperability side of the energy industry?
Sure. You know, I think we take an enormous amount. I think we're really surprised with, for the most part, how interoperable so many of the gadgets that we have are. And part of what has made them interoperable is the Linux kernel, which every new release ships with. I actually don't know how many right now, but last I checked, it was over 10,000 drivers. And that is what enables basically, you know, the kernel to be able to provide that level of connectivity. So when I think about solving the interoperability problem with energy, there are probably a few different dimensions. One of them is absolutely the software and the drivers to connect distributed energy resources. And some of it is related to data in order to be able to ensure that. And you know, and then another part of it is being able to ensure that there are APIs that allow for interconnection that can get picked up. And so we have this, I see us kind of moving very quickly towards a convergence. And it's a convergence of electric mobility, of electricity, of telecommunications and 5G, of cloud, you know, blockchain and new finance models, and that you know, that when we talk about transactive energy, for instance, what we're really talking about is price-based grid coordination, and you know, that enables that sort of flexibility where we can, because we have, you know, what's made the grid work has been high inertia. And when you have renewable energy, you're moving towards a low inertia environment. And so we have to come up with new mechanisms for ensuring that the grid is balanced. And so when I think about, like, at least what I understand about what Shiva is doing and what Vic are doing, they are looking at some part of that problem. And what the Linux Foundation has been able to do is to really all we do is create a neutral place for collective investment, so that you know, that intellectual property is protected, and that if people co-invest by collaboratively or collectively investing in something, or a leverage development model, that each of the parties has access to that, and nobody can come along and say, oh, actually that trademark is mine and I'm going to take this. And that's the reason why it works, is the governance and the neutral community. And so we don't bet on horses. What we do is we create community. And so I think much more about solving the interoperability problem, more like a gardener, actually, than a technologist, because things are constantly going to be changing. And so trying to come up with a fixed solution for interoperability is sort of a fool's journey. Instead, what we want to do is create the conditions for interoperability and for things playing together. And we do that through harmonizing really fragmented systems.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's wonderful. And then, you know, and speaking of the the technologies that are, you know, under that umbrella, so to speak, or the fine detail is where, you know, Coben Systems and SignWatts come in. Vic, on Coben Systems, can you explain what really motivated you to see an opportunity for smart panels to play a role in the furtherance of renewable energy, as well as microgrids and energy management in general?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it basically started with organization. My background being in engineering, and I was an electrician and building homes at the time. With organizing the way everything was connected into an electrical panel. With Genius, it further developed into solving the problem of all these disparaged systems and processes that are in place in the world today. Like if you take North America, for instance, the utility sector, the consumers, every state, every jurisdiction, it's a complete mix of all different types of regulations. And, you know, we saw the ability that if we could change the way it's delivered, like I said before, and consumed by providing an agnostic and a holistic platform to serve as like a piece of middleware between the utility, between what Shula was saying, between all the other technologies, Shebas, to provide that interoperability, to work towards a unified type of a platform, with the emergence of a lot of these gadgets and what we call .com products, which are basically short-lived. We created a foundational technology that if you look at, regardless of what you look at, EV charging, solar, battery, residential, commercial, institutional, there's a common denominator of where that electricity comes in and where it moves out from, and that's at the load panel level. And if we look today at the entire value chain, it's all been invested in. The load panel level has been ignored up until now. So, the purpose of this is to provide more continuity, clarity, and provide transparent control for all stakeholders.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm excited about your technology as a solar developer. And in the last 10 years, I've seen such opportunity for smarter control of our energy. And there's so many inhibiting factors towards developing those .com technologies when you don't have that sort of approach. You need an underlying foundational approach. And that's why I appreciate the Linux Foundation as well. On the open source side, I think that's a foundational software aspect as well. And then Sheba, on SignWatts, what motivated you? Where did you see an opportunity to develop SignWatts technology and really apply an improvement to power conversion?
Yeah, so originally, I mean, when SignWatts got started, the foundational basis for SignWatts was to drive down the cost of both residential and also utility scale solar installation process and the solar development. Now, as we realized over time, what happened was that the utility scale solar has gone down the path of traditional power conversion, three-phase power conversion, into taking solar and connecting it to the grid. There, we found that there was significant amount of opportunity on the residential side, both from a system cost level and also on the hardware piece. And those are primarily driven by power density, significant amount of efficiency gain, and also driving down the cost of residential solar. Now, if you are able to solve the residential solar, then a big portion of our problem, which related to the 1.5 degree C targets that we have from IPCC, can be addressed, because then you can localize the power generation. It's primarily not happening because of the excessive cost of residential solar. So we found that with our technology, we were getting about 3 to 4 times performance improvement and cost improvement on residential system. I'm not going to go into the granular details, but then what happened very soon after we went through the process and we took the technology into field demonstration with utility engagement, we realized very soon that the low-hanging fruit is actually not on the residential solar side. It was actually on electric e-mobility. And there, the transformation is just significantly profound. We are talking about many different components of the entire ecosystem getting compacted into a vehicle. I mean, it's true transformation of the entire marketplace. And so we dedicated all our resources, and we have been hunkered down trying to bring this technology to market. So I guess, I mean, it has been a sequence of progression going there, as with anything. But I mean, we learned our lessons on the photovoltaic side, and we believe the technology is right and ready to go on to electric vehicles, which is actually an easier application than photovoltaics. I mean, believe it or not.
Absolutely. Yeah, the variability and the uncertainty and the cloud goes over and all that kind of stuff is certainly going to make it challenging to inverters. So companies like Enphase and SolarEdge have really mastered that. And it sounds like, yeah, certainly that's a big hurdle, and there's opportunity in low-hanging fruit in vehicle to grid, which is what I'm curious with Sholi, is, at, the Linux Foundation, you're working on some vehicle to grid integrations. Can you tell us a little bit about that that effort that you're in? You're muted, Sholi.
Unmute would help. So Elad NL recently joined LF Energy, and Elad is the host to the Open Charging Alliance. And Open Charging Alliance is what puts forward the OCPP standard, which I'm imagining both of you are, or at least Shiba is probably using as part of their protocol. And so it's not that, so what we're doing is we're standing up a special interest group that will end up being an umbrella project for e-mobility. And we see that there are a number of things that really could get worked on. Right now, for instance, OCPP, there are like 125 different implementations of OCPP. That makes absolutely no sense. It's a standard. Let's standardize on one, let's use that, and then keep moving so that we can really begin to climb the value chain. So the first project that Elad put in was a reference implementation of a complete library of OpenADR. And so we launched this past week a project called Open Leader. And we did this with Elad and with the OpenADR Alliance. The next thing that we're going to do is, we're beginning to look at different implementations of OCPP so that we can actually come up with a de facto implementation, and that software, rather than having 125 different versions of it, that's really a big waste of time. Let's have one that really becomes the standard and work on that and optimize that. After that, the next thing is to really work on ISO 15118, which is the vehicle to grid standard, and to come up with a common reference implementation of 15118. So those are the things that I see on our horizon. We're also working with Stanford. Ram Rajagopal has a project where that's really about siting and infrastructure investment. Like, where are we going to put all of these new charging environments? How are we going to roll this out? And so he's building a lot of modeling tools in order to be able to actually identify those things. So I would hope that in 2021, that software will come in. But really, I have to say that I feel like we're at the very beginning, and I'm just starting to beat the drum around e-mobility, and to really get the various different actors to come together to identify what is the core plumbing software that we want to collectively invest, so we do the higher order value adds. I think most companies unfortunately spend more time than they would like to on the lower levels of the stack that are really commodities. And what we want to do is to be able to share that so that the 20% value on top of it really can significantly drive, no pun intended, towards our carbon decarbonization goals.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's wonderful. And I see personally, in talking to Shiba and Vic at Kobin and SignWatt's opportunity for them to not waste time and to be interoperable. And Vic, on vehicle to grid technology, you were on another panel for the Clean Energy Revolution. Could you describe for us where Kopin Systems can play a role in vehicle to grid technology?
Sure. When I go back to my comment about foundational technology, we have the unique capability right now today, and we've had this for quite some time, whereas we can actually change the state of our breaker that's inserted into our panel from a load to a source. So the argument is, where does the action occur from the onset? Is the car controlling that, or is it happening in between? Of course, there's an inversion process that has to be considered, or is it happening at the panel level? So I think we believe that providing a technology that opens that door for a lot of flexibility, whether it's the vehicle or whether it's in the inversion process in between, to us, I think there's a lot of advantages for the industry that, when people are installing infrastructure, I think the emphasis today and the importance is to look forward rather than putting something in that you're going to end up replacing in 2-3 years. And you're putting good money after that, and by doing that, I think that's a much better approach to it. Although there's been a lot of investment made and a lot of R&D and products starting to emerge to enable V2G, and again, that's sort of sitting in the middle at this point. So where it lands, we don't know. I think there's a tremendous amount of work being done on the V2G side, but we're certainly equipped to be able to integrate with that in a manner which is, agnostic again.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Sheba, vehicle to grid technology is something, as you would know, is a challenge. And Sholi has indicated to me in an interview from the past that vehicle to grid technology has a ways to go. Can you describe why efficiency may be the inhibiting factor, and how SignWatt views with its technology opportunity in an improvement there?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, Les, and thanks to Shali for carrying us through the interoperability aspect of it in the beginning. I look forward to working with you, Vic. I mean, looks like you have a very interesting product over there. Les has talked about it quite extensively. Now, coming back to the V2G aspect of it, what's going on in the industry is, if you look at starting from AC and going into the DC, into the batteries, there are many stages of conversion that has to happen. There is a transformer, and beyond the transformer, there are multiple stages before and after the transformer for isolation purposes, for ground fault protection, many other things, leakage current, and a lot of other things that is associated with the vehicle. That is required with the old technology. Now, once you go through all of those stages, when you come from the AC to the battery and the DC in the car, you're losing efficiency points every step of the way. You're losing efficiencies because the number of stages you convert, you're losing kilowatt hours and kilowatts. Now, what we do is we have a unique way of doing it and handling it, and Vic would actually like it because it actually simplifies your work. We go straight into your panel or directly to the grid, and all that labor associated with the inverter and everything is gone. Now, when you come to V2G, the reverse process that the electrons are now going from the battery in the vehicle to the grid, think of it that you are pushing a huge boulder up a mountain. So that's the analogy that I use with the guys. It's basically that you have to do it in such a way that there is lowest amount of friction or impedance, we call it in electrical term, is impedance. The lowest amount of impedance going back into the grid. If you don't do that correctly, if that impedance is too high, it's not only an inefficient process, it also couples with that you need a higher voltage battery to push the same amount of power into the grid. And then beyond that, once we get into V2G, vehicles would be mandated to do VAR compensation, reactive power compensation, right through. I mean, many other things that will be imposed on them, like what has happened on solar photovoltaics. So the power architecture is sacrosanct. I mean, if you don't address that properly, everything falls apart. So what we do is we have a proprietary way of handling this that it doesn't seem like to us it's a mountain anymore. It's a flat land and we just roll the boulder over that. And that's how the electrons get transferred and everything seemingly is much better to do. So.
Right. And just from my layman's understanding, Shiba, there's 15% loss going one way and then another 15% loss the other way. Was it correct that you only have about 1.5% loss going both directions?
Well, we don't like to talk about those numbers on a public panel right now, but I will only say that it is extremely disruptive compared to the rest of the industry.
Awesome. And that's what we need, disruption and innovation. So surely, I'm a big decentralist. I believe power and, assets and resources should be in the people's hands. Can you describe what role open source in general, as well as the efforts of LF Energy can do to put control into the hands of the individuals and the communities and the localities? Mute.
Sorry about that. I think that really depends. So LF Energy was started by transmission system operators, and then they were partnered with by distribution system operators, and so these are folks who are responsible for the grid, for high, medium, and low voltage, and obviously behind the meter. Behind the, when you're at the transmission level, there really only, I think there are like 263 transmission system operators on the planet. It's a very finite set of people. And then you go out into behind the meter, and all of a sudden you get, hundreds of thousands of, it's extremely fragmented. So I think that I don't know how much LF Energy is going to play in the place of kind of the individual consumers. I think that is really up for grabs. It's possible. I mean, the way I look at it, I see that the voice activated devices want to own you and want to own your data. Mm-hmm. And that I assume that they are going to own the customer. Now, then we're going to have to actually begin to talk about consumer electronics and the kind of loads that people put on. So when, Shiba talks about basically radical energy efficiency, which I totally believe is what we are doing here. It's like, what industry on the planet has a commodity that they waste 60% of? I mean, that's just unheard of. So imagine water people or, woods or food or, metals, anybody talking about that level of waste. So I think we have to shift our relationship to electrons to really begin thinking about radical energy efficiency. And so where I think that the Lennox Foundation can play and is really in facilitating and enabling grid operators to transform themselves into network operators. And in becoming network operators, they will in fact transform the ability to manage, the public domain, because at least in the West, we have a tremendous amount of investment, and that there is a value in that investment in terms of keeping costs down, but there's a tension because the closer, I'm also a big, produce local, consume local. And the more that you do that, the less electrons you're going to lose. So, it's a very interesting economics, and how much it is going to be in the, power electronics, I don't know. But I can tell you that on my, 6-month plan is that I'm beginning to plant the seeds with the consumer electronics manufacturers, the Panasonics, Toshibas, Mitsubishis, Fujitsu's, Samsungs, LGs, to really begin to look at what does those assets in relationship to the grid, what kinds of signals, what is the directional role that we're going in. And that's where I think that the Linux Foundation can play a huge role, is ensuring, for instance, that notion of signals from the grid actually become an integral part of sort of the operations. And then it will be open to the voice activated devices or the people who own customers to actually make the case for, abstracting the complexity of that into some sort of a device where you just like go, hey, voice activated device, I want to help the grid today. And that will happen. I don't think it'll happen in the next 2 years, but I think, I take the long view, and I think, I think out 30 years and then backcast. And, part of it is organizing the group, the utilities to begin thinking of themselves as network operators who are going to be managing tens of billions of devices at the edge. And that's really the place where I go around V2G that says, I don't know how ready we are for that. The technology is proven, but that utilities have the ability to actually have that kind of voltage and frequency. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what I appreciate about decentralization is not so much to take away the benefit that we've had from the grid so far and so long. It's just to create more resilience and put more opportunity in the hands of people to have energy storage, to participate in the supply side of energy, as well as producing their own, to play a role. I see the more role the individual and consumer and business can play in the energy process in coordination with the utilities, I see more benefit to everyone. And I like to see people have that control, because ultimately it creates savings and efficiency and resilience. And ultimately that's what I think, from my view, that Linux Foundation can do is provide the backbone to allowing people to be more efficient, more resilient, and to save more money, as well as the utilities too.
Can I just add one thing to that? So I think that the way to think about it is, I think that the internet is something that's we're so integrated into our lives. I don't see the Linux Foundation playing a role in the individual websites, right? What I see is ensuring that the plumbing is safe and secure, and that we actually are taking the steps in the right direction to manage a highly decentralized grid, including the reality at some point that we are going to need to create an inventory of everything. We are going to have to take an approach towards, distributed ledger technology in some way to be able to identify what those resources are in order to ensure the permissioning and configuration is safe. Right now, there are, counterfeit chips that are ending up on the grid. There's counterfeit electronics that are ending up on the grid. Those things are actually, they're what I would refer to as the Trojan horse that could bring this whole thing to its knees. And I think we have to find a way from a security standpoint to ensure our supply chain. And so, when I think about the work that Vic, you're doing, it's like you are in fact providing a critical coordination role for a supply chain, but you are selling real stuff. It is hard, it is physical, and there's software that goes with it. That needs to be, there needs to be attestation for that, so that a utility understands that that panel is a safe panel, and that everything that sits underneath that has been permissioned correctly. And so those are the kinds of projects that I see the Linux Foundation being able to go after, as opposed to, how a particular individual homeowner might use something.
Absolutely. So, Vic, segueing off of what Shirley just said, how can Kopin Systems play a role in resilience and in the localization and security of energy on a regionalized basis? So, you've got your local, regional, state players. How can Kopin Systems coordinate with utilities to localize energy and energy management?
It's a big process, and like what we see typically from the time we've all known electricity, when we turn on a light or turn on a stove, it came from a centralized point, being the utility, and it flew down to the consumer, where the consumer really had no ability to control anything aside from perhaps what they bought, like a space heater that they can plug in or unplug, or a different set of lights. But from the larger perspective, there was never any technology to provide the data and the transparency for a consumer to really see the results of their actions from an electricity perspective, and to take that data and make informed decisions. So when we look at our model today, where the utility is here, the consumer is here, and I think there were a few articles I read on that, we have to invert that whole process, all right? Rather than making, the consumer subservient to the higher authority, let's break that down. Can you imagine a world, or let's look at America, for instance, 93 million homes. The carbon footprint collectively all these homes produce. If these homes had the ability to be able to issue priorities in accordance to their lifestyle on how each and every one of us lives, and yes, some similarities, but primarily it's all a different landscape from home to home. Have the ability to shift those loads by using a renewable resource to lessen the dependency on the grid. At the same time, providing the utility the visibility in a manner such that they can issue a command down to a consumer, and the consumer can go, hey, oh, okay, so we're in peak time today. It's 102 degrees. Oh boy, my air conditioner is going to go off, because that's what they understood from previous events like that. Well, there's going to be a demand response event in 15 minutes. I don't think I want to do that. Opt out of it. System automatically, through the algorithms, calculates the situation in a home and readjusts the loads to enable you to continue to run that air conditioner. Same thing, be it for a dishwasher, pool pump, whatever the load is. And then take that information and send it back to the utility in a form of data on a disaggregated basis to show them each and every load within the home what it did. We look at today what's happening. We have a smart meter, which basically sucks, in my opinion. You get an aggregate reading if you get that reading all the time. So there's a lot of issues there. But can you imagine getting that information down to the appliance or the load, how long you've used it, when you used it, day after day after day, and what, which Shuli said, is having a company like a utility in that network, taking that data and compiling it in such a way where they can create a lot of benefit to society, to families, to homes, and allow the integration of renewable sources like batteries, V2G, solar, fuel cell, other components, and have them work within that dynamic, again, in a transparent manner, and where both people can make a decision for the betterment of all. I mean, we believe we see that coming very quickly. And with all the darts that are flying out with the different technologies emerging, there has to be a method where we can take that, bring it together, and use it effectively rather than having a lot of repetition, in the industry. I think that's, reducing to the ridiculous and then building back up from there is a better use of our time. I mean, our lives, like look at today, what's happening. Our lives are so busy. We've always said the best way to manage your energy is not to manage it. Have something that will do it for you.
Right. Well, it sounds like to me, it's more of the more choice and control the utilities have and the individual, the more of a marketplace, which will yield to greater resilience, efficiency, and savings for everyone. And I really do believe that smart panel or load controls is a significant way to do that. Shiba, with regard, you've mentioned that, packing all technologies into a cell phone has really revolutionized life as we know it, with the calculator being on the phone, the compasses on the phone, so many applications are on the phone. How do you see packing the technologies that you have and others into the car, how that can play a role in resilience and community sustainability as far as power, and how can we see more access to energy as a result of packing all of these things into one device?
Yeah, so I think, that was a pretty loaded question, and thank you very much for that. Nonetheless, let me unpack it a little bit, if I may, step by step. There were a few things that Shirley talked about. One was she envisions that the grid operators would get into the role of network operators. Amen. I mean, that's exactly what we have to have. I mean, that's absolutely right. And then Vic talked about the transparency aspect of electricity consumption so that the consumers can make a better choice and better informed decisions. So that's exactly what we are trying to do with all of these things. But what is fundamentally missing are actually two aspects to this. And you talked about resiliency and reliability. We cannot escape that anymore. The grid infrastructure of 100 years old that used to bear all the electrons for us and bring the electricity home is being put to the ultimate test by you call it global warming, climate change, Mother Nature, what have you. It's getting to the extremes right now. So that is playing out with the rolling blackouts in California. This is, in my perception, I believe, we actually knew that this kind of trend would happen anytime intermittent generation becomes behind the meter, intermittent generation gets close to about 10%. That's when the trouble would happen. That was predicted back in 2017, and now we are seeing it. I never anticipated that it's going to happen this fast. Now, coming back there, taking that as a cue, is that we have to have resiliency built into the home. We have to have reliability built into the home. And we found that here we have this vehicle sitting there with 80 to 100 kilowatt hours. Probably in the future, we'll probably have about 120 20, 25, maybe even 150 kilowatt hours in these vehicles. That's a lot of energy. That can potentially run a home for a good 4 or 5 days. And if you have solar on your roof, you're good to go maybe a week if you don't get into any kind of natural calamities and other things. And so what we did was we looked into the bidirectionality of it. And because of our high density power conversion process, we bring in, I'm not going to divulge everything here on this open panel, but let's just say that there are at least 7 major components of the energy system that is required today to power up electric transportation can be all compacted if you do it right. I mean, that's very profound. It's not just from a cost perspective. Shirley talked about energy efficiency briefly, and she's spot on. Primary energy factor of electricity generation is actually one of the highest of among any kind of energy sources. If you look at that, it only makes sense for us to bring down wherever we can, any kind of low-hanging fruit, whatever you find, to bring down the consumption of energy. And that starts with energy efficiency, lowering the consumption by individual consumers as Coben system is trying to do, and bringing in the interoperability that Shirley is trying to do through her LF Foundation. That all plays into it because every unit of kilowatt hour saved on the demand side today on the grid would save 3 on the US grid. In Europe, it's probably 2.5, close to maybe it's coming down to about 2 because of renewable energy. But even at 2, that still is a significant opportunity. We have to get to probably 1.2, 1.1. So that's a significant opportunity, we believe, and combination of integrating many different components that serves the entire ecosystem today into one piece allows us to lower down the cost, improve efficiencies, and then finally we get exponential scaling of everything, of all of these benefits.
Yeah, I really like, essentially to sum up the 3 of you, you're all essentially consolidating and building a framework that can deconstruct the moving parts and to harmonize, what's going on the load side, the energy management side, and the efficiency side. I have one more question for each one of you. It's the same question for each one of you. Would be how can the LF Energy Foundation essentially advance renewable energy and decarbonize the world?
I hope that's what we're doing right now. I think that one of the open questions that I have right now, which folks, when we talk about utilities becoming network operators, that's really fundamentally, that's a fundamental transformation. And so, and I think that we have to consider the possibility that utilities may not be able to do this. And so that's one of the things that I have been thinking about, like what if they actually just fundamentally can't do it? They don't have the ability to manage the security. They don't have the ability to manage the data. And then we see on this other side, we have the hyperscaling technology companies that have become that precisely because of open source, who are making these extremely audacious decarbonization goals. And so then the question becomes, do you trust them with your data? Do they have the ability to become network operators? Have they de facto become energy companies because of those goals? And how is that going to, in fact, affect the marketplace? I think in the United States, our regulatory process is really profoundly lagging behind the needs of actually our ability to do that decarbonization. What I talk about is that In other words, you have log in a river and stick a dynamite on, and that's how they get the log jam to move. And so when I think about open source, I think that it's a little bit like the stick of dynamite, because what it is requiring people, what it is requiring those who are participant in the energy market, regardless of whether they are, a hyperscaling a technology business, or they are a utility, or they are startups. What it requires is kind of the ability to collaborate. So, and I think that that's what LF Energy does, is provide that. My fear when I look at what we have done in the United States with COVID is that we are about to do the exact same thing with regards to energy. And I find that extremely terrifying to imagine that we are going to have individual state managed, efforts that are not coordinated, and that we are not able to actually recognize that even if the United States decarbonizes, we have to support the rest of the world to do it. And that's the same thing. I say this to Denmark. It's like, it's great. It is thrilling that you are who you are, EirGrid. It's thrilling that you are who you are, but it is not, that is not what is going to get us there. So we have to begin to shift our strategy to the recognition, like COVID, that we cannot, it's just not like we can have these, borders and walls. We actually have to solve this together, because atmosphere is everywhere.
What's your slogan for LF Energy?
The power of together.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things I totally see the Linux Foundation doing, is bringing people together for collaboration purposes, and superseding the infrastructure that's inhibiting us now by governments. And there's just so much red tape, and I really appreciate what the Linux Foundation is doing to bring us together. Koban Systems, Vic, is very unique and in its approach, and way ahead of the rest of the market in terms of load controls, and there's just so much more that Koban Systems and the Genius panel can do. Can you kind of summarize what you think renewable energy, or how Koban Systems is going to help advance renewable energy as well as decarbonize?
Well, I think it sums it up into a couple of words: build smart, live smart. Which we've had that since inception through choice, compliance, and profitability. I think we've succeeded in introducing to the masses a low-cost solution that removes a lot of the barriers. When we look, and Shuli, I could listen to that for hours, and you're spot on with that. When we look at today's system and the utilities, I mean, obviously we're going through such a transition, historic transition. Last time this happened was approximately 100 years ago, but this time it has a much larger factor into it, and there are going to be a lot of changes. And I think the entities and individuals that are trying to push back on that system or those changes will eventually find out that, come on, man, we gotta work together here. I mean, when we look at the energy model and utilities have been in decline for quite some time. The forward-thinking utilities that are capturing these thought processes and moving into these technologies and slowly assisting to bring them up to market, I think are seeing tremendous benefit. Now, whether they want to or not, there's going to come a point in time with technologies such as Genius, such as others that are out there, that gives you, the consumer, the ability to make a decision and a choice. They're going to realize that for the betterment of our world and decarbonization, why would we prevent that when we can enable that? I mean, as these events happen, I think, and as technology moves and it gets embraced, like what Elon Musk is doing. I mean, you go back 8 years ago, they go, yeah, forget it. Yeah, big deal. You know how many people tried to make a car, an electric car? Yeah. Look at them now, and look where that's going. So the pivot for support is happening quite greatly now. And I think we're going to see that in a lot of other areas. And we're going to continue on because we know we are on a path that gives people that choice, allows them to make informed decisions, and benefits not only themselves, but benefits their neighbor and other people. Our plan here is if we can equip the whole world with our panels, we have different models of them for commercial and residential. If we can, or partially, I think we'll be that much better off for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's some inhibiting factors for renewable energy, and largely the lack of interoperability on behind the meter between the different devices. And so I see huge potential on the load control, turning a breaker into load or generation, being able to track every data source and a data point behind the meter gives you more than just that smart meter general consolidated aggregated information set. By having more information and data behind the meter, I think you're going to have more control, and that's going to help advance renewable energy. When you have, there's only a few companies like Enphase Energy that are creating interoperability between the different aspects of the solar system. So I see that you'll enable the interoperability without having to have one company provide your panel or your fuel cell or whatever. It's going to create that interoperability behind the meter, despite what technology you're using for each breaker. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I mean, to us, it doesn't matter what the energy resource is. Last year, one of the major milestones, we achieved utility grade metering down to the circuit load level basis. So we can have dynamic pricing for your stove, for fridge, that can be controlled, or signal can be issued from the utility. You either accept or you don't. If you don't accept, you pay a different rate, or you can have your renewable power that load instead of the utility. And it comes back to, I mean, why shouldn't we know how much each load is costing us? I mean, one easy question is, would you ever pay your credit card bill without seeing a breakdown of all those transactions? No, you wouldn't. Why are you doing that for electricity when we have the technology today that allows that?
Absolutely.
So, but yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I think it's a key. So Sheba, on SINWATS, how do you see the role of SINWATS in your vision of rolling microgrids? How can that advance renewable energy and decarbonization?
Yeah, I mean, as I think we talked about it in probably somewhat of a beating around the bush in that sense. Maybe I can come up with some numbers here. In 2030, if everything goes according to plan and we still go through the same projections as was done by the IEA, we are looking at about 250 million vehicles coming on the road that would be electric vehicles by that time frame cumulatively. And the demand on the network, this is globally, the demand on the network would be the equivalent of about probably 92 million US homes. And that's not just electricity, it's the entire energy use of a US home. That's very significant. And to generate that kind of energy, doing it clean and sustainably, let's say, I mean, we do it on the centralized platform, we're talking about having to generate about 142 million US homes worth of energy, which is basically, by the way, it's like 20% more than the US number of homes. And then on top of it, we'll lose 1/3 of it on that platform. We'll completely lose 1/3 of that. That's just not acceptable. It cannot be sustainable, and it's also not scalable. Going back into all of that discussion that, I mean, how do you make it resilient and reliable given all the background that is going on in California, it only makes sense to actually bring the power sources to home and bring it to home with respect to cost and lowering losses significantly. And that's what we do. I mean, we try to make that all play out really seamlessly, and the vehicle doesn't really need to know that. I mean, it has been packed with so much of capabilities, and it becomes the transactional unit on a hardware basis, probably resides on the LF Foundation world, and connects through into Coben Systems meter into the grid. And then we speak the same language to the grid, and the grid operators, in that case, now the network operators, gets to see a complete predictable energy resource behind the meter, which is fully predictable on a real-time basis, because now we have energy storage built in, and the management of the grid becomes much simpler, which is pretty much the problem today, that because of the behind the meter systems, most of the systems are unpredictable. Their load versus generation, with so much generation going on in California behind the meter, they have become very unpredictable. And when you become unpredictable, the grid authorities, they don't know how much resource they have to keep in reserve, so that if there is any disturbances, they can bring that online. And so what has been going on is they are keeping a big margin for themselves, which is the right thing to do, don't get me wrong, but at the cost of the consumer, that is with the rolling blackouts. That's what is going on in California.
Yeah.
So we believe that we can shave off that gap very significantly by bringing in predictability and a lot of energy storage on the demand side, lowering the wastage, and increasing the efficiency, lowering cost, and essentially, as you call it, less micro utilities on wheels.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I see a huge potential to reduce the cost of batteries for a home or a business by integrating what's already there in an electric vehicle. You're saving so much money there. You can take your power with you. You can bring it anywhere. You can power villages from remote locations. And your 30 to 60% loss we're seeing now, well, if a car charges up at a big facility and moves to a village, there's going to be some loss, but it's not probably going to be any more significant than the losses of transmission lines. So I see energy access, decarbonization, and lower cost of energy being a result of rolling microgrids. So I love your vision. So all of you, I appreciate the time you took to talk about smart grids. I see, as I indicated, huge room for interoperability, software, efficiency, and all of the decarbonization goals we have, as well as communities coming together to accomplish this. I think all of you are on the right path, and I really appreciate the time you took as well. I hope that you will all share each other's contacts on LinkedIn. That's where we've all met, is LinkedIn. Thank you, LinkedIn. And, so again, thank you all for coming, and we will be chatting soon in the future, and I'll look forward to it.
Great trip.